Sterile Processing University presents Issues and Challenges in Sterile Processing, a podcast conversation. Today's episode is Experience versus Competencies, when time in SPD doesn't equal training. Well, hello, Nancy.
Hi, Jason. How you doing?
Very good. Another great topic today.
Yeah, this is near and dear to my heart. Somebody who's worked with competency and certification for over 30 years. It doesn't get enough attention, but I think it's starting to now. So it's really good we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I think competencies and, is very important because you can put, and it's the same thing with me. I put in, probably good 12, 14 years in my work. And then I met you and we did a competency and I was way behind because of lack of good continuing education or the opportunity for good continuing education. So I definitely learned, and that was probably 2015. I definitely learned how important competencies were that year. And, having, you can have all the experience in the world, but it doesn't mean you're doing it right.
That's the whole point. I mean, the work we do is so important, and we have to be able to verify that we're doing it correctly because we live in what we call a litigious society, people getting sued left and right. And, when you have that on the line, you have to be able to prove that what you say is true really is true. I mean, we all say, well, I'm certified. Great. What have you done since certification? Where did you get your education? We need to talk about that because there's a lot of stuff going on with continuing education that are people really getting educated?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny because I hear that. I've heard that line so much. I'm certified. Well, okay. Or there's somebody who's not certified, but actually does continuing educations, like listens and goes online and actually knows more than the certified person, and they don't want to give that person the respect because they're not certified. But these, that could be somebody going to seminars and doing whatever. And I've seen that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Competency is so important for a number of reasons. Number one, Joint Commission says we got to have it. So that's a good enough reason, although not all facilities are Joint Commission accredited. There are other accrediting organizations, but, for liability and accountability, you really need to have it. The second reason is we still continue to have an unsatisfactory number of medical errors. Now, medical errors includes stuff from SPD, and we're going to talk about them today. Number three, our job is to protect the public. First, do no harm. People come to us at their most vulnerable time when they're sick, and we're supposed to make them better. And unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. And then number four, we have devices today that defy cleaning. I mean, when you and I started many years ago, we had Kellys and Krauts and knife handles and retractors and stuff like that. But once we hit laparoscopic instruments in the 80s, everything changed. But you know what didn't change? The education in sterile processing.
Yeah.
And from there, we go on to stereotactic. We have robotics, and now we have robotics for different body systems. They now have urology robotics, which is brand new, just hitting the field.
Yeah.
All of these instruments, one company could have 7 versions, and each version could have different IFUs. This is a tremendous amount of knowledge that people need to have. So competency is really, really important.
Yeah, because I can tell you, being somebody who worked in decontam a lot, you can really, like, a lot of people want to say there's like a system to just cleaning, but the way that everything is so complex right now with the IFUs and all the new devices, you're cleaning everything different. Like everything you pick up has to be cleaned a different way.
But you see, a lot of people don't see it that way.
Yeah.
A clamp is a clamp is a clamp. A lumen is a lumen is a lumen. Not true. You could have the same instrument, but from a different company, especially from Europe.
Mhm.
European IFUs are very different. And I wonder how many people really read them, because a lot of the IFUs from Europe say after cleaning, you should do high level disinfection.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
we don't do that in the United States.
Yeah, I didn't even,
So,
I never,
oh,
wow.
yeah. Oh,
Wow.
yeah. That's a big problem. So they have different temperatures that we use in sterilization. They use 273. So it's really important that we get these IFUs and we read them. And if we don't understand them, first of all, somebody in the department, I was anal retentive. I wanted to see them myself.
Mhm.
But if you're somebody who's really good at reviewing them, say your supervisor, they have to review them. And anything that seems uh, out of realm of what you normally do, whether it be for cleaning or sterilization, they've got to bring that to the attention of the manager. So what does the
Yes.
manager do? Well, the manager says, well, we have to follow the IFU. Not if it's wrong, or not
Yeah.
if you can't comply with it.
Mhm.
If you can't comply with it, you're at fault right from the get-go. So you have to call the company. And if you call customer service, they're just going to read to you exactly what's in the IFU that you have. So I recommend they call the product manager, which is the person that every company has that submits the information to the FDA for clearance. And you say, look, you've got a 273 temperature. We don't use that in the United States.
Yeah.
Or you're telling us and I've called companies and they have provided an alternate IFU.
Yeah.
So, but you have to do it. You can't just assume that everybody's going to be able to interpret them correctly, and you have to make sure that they know how to interpret them.
So let me ask you this, and it's because you just said this, and this really I think is very important for people to understand, because we said that we don't do 273 in the United States, right? But
Right.
if you had instruments and sterilizer that was validated for it, and you had the supplies that were validated for it,
Yeah.
you could do it.
Correct. And I think some of the sterilizer manufacturers are responding to this. I know of one facility that actually purchased in a hospital a sterilizer with a 273 validated temperature, because they had thousands of dollars worth of instruments that they purchased that were made in Europe, and they said, hey, we can't process these.
Yeah.
And it was a major issue. And then, like you said, they had to find a BI, a CI, packaging material that were all validated for that temperature. But if you can meet that requirement, you're fine.
Mhm.
But that's, again, another change. When people have to know when to change cycles, they have to know when to change sterilizers. In a situation like that, uh, we didn't do a lot of gravity cycles. So there are these pre-printed adhesive labels. And we had, whenever anything needed gravity, we'd have the label on it said, warning, gravity displacement only, to alert the employee to make sure that they put it in the right cycle. So, but you're absolutely correct. People have to read the IFUs and comply with them. But if they can't comply with them because they don't have the equipment, then that becomes a legal issue,
Yeah.
because you're not complying with the IFU.
Yes. Yeah. And again, that's what I'm saying. Like that's why I kind of brought it up, because one, you got people who automatically just go, you can't do 273, and that's not right. That's not the right correct answer, because you could if you do it right, and then you're right. And if you don't have it done right, if you're not doing it right, it becomes a legal thing. And I don't think other people understand that part of it too. If they do something off the cuff, they're just like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. No, it is, because if it's ever caught, there's an infection or an audit or something, you're gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. How can you explain to a jury or in a deposition where the lawyers are going to be questioning you? Well, Nancy, this clamp was made in Europe, and it says that you have to sterilize it at 273 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes.
Uh-huh.
Did you do so? Well, no, we don't have that cycle, so we put it in 270. Well, how do you know it was sterile? Well, we can sterilize anything if we put it in 270 at 4 minutes. Yeah, but that's not what the manufacturer tested.
Yeah.
So, and you are not a manufacturer, so you don't have the right to make that determination. Yeah, but I put a BI in the load. Doesn't matter. The FDA says that the manufacturer of the device must provide specific instructions for cleaning, packaging, and sterilization. The user, that's us, must comply with them. Period. End of story.
Yep. All right. So, like usual, I think we went on our
Well,
tangent.
it's important for people to understand that because that all ties into competency. Because
Yes.
if you think that you can just switch that to 270, where's your competency?
Correct. So training. So there's training and competencies because usually competencies follow after you train a person, but the training should mirror the competency.
Well,
So.
I'm sorry. We had a very interesting discussion about this at a meeting,
Uh-huh,
and we were talking about training and education.
uh-huh.
And somebody got up and said, "No, we don't train technicians. We train dogs." And let me tell you, my ears went up, and I was ready to pounce. And I said, "Excuse me." I said, "No, there's two things that you need. Number one, training is not the equivalent to demonstrated competency.
Uh-huh.
Training is where you get the knowledge and skills in order to perform certain actions. So I am demonstrating to you how to perform a Bowie-Dick test. If I'm educating you, I'm saying a Bowie-Dick test gets done every day on a pre-vacuum sterilizer, blah, 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 and you put it on the bottom shelf and what have you. But with training, you're actually doing it. You're making them doing it. You make them get the pack, check for the expiration date. So the two of them go together. There's the education where you tell them this is what we have to do. And the training is this is how we do it. So
Mhm.
they have to go together. And I don't see that always happening. What I usually see is what I call robot training. Do this, do that, end the story.
Yes,
Not mine.
I think that's poor onboarding. I think that's one of the first steps. If you don't have a good onboarding process, how are you going to train new people to pass competencies, or even have people to train people because they weren't they're not even probably following what you would give in a competency.
Well, we've talked about that. You have to be very careful about who's doing the training. And you may have a couple of people, because most people don't have a dedicated educator, but they not only have to be knowledgeable, they have to have patience because people don't know. We're not washing dishes at home. This is a total different ball game. And they also have to be very supportive. The first time you show me how to wrap something, it probably looks like a 2-year-old did it because it's not like gift wrapping at home. It has to be
Yes.
done a certain way so the OR can open it up. And so you don't want to embarrass or humiliate them because you can really lose valuable employees when they go, well, I didn't sign up for this. So it's really important that when you start your training, in addition to that person being knowledgeable, to be able to give a good support to that person and be like you said, not saying, look, we usually do it this way, but when we're really busy, we can do this. No.
Yeah.
And that's why they should have your policy right there when they're doing the training so
Mhm.
they don't deviate from it.
Yeah. And the other thing too is when you get busy, you can't just or you're short staffed, and you're going to be short staffed for like a month, and you can't just say, okay, new person, decontam for the month, and you're not going to learn anything. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, I've been at places where they were short of staff. They had new people and they figured they could do less harm in decontam because they don't know the instruments and we got to get the instruments out. So just put them in decontam, which is the worst thing you could do.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because if they're not familiar with the instruments and how to clean them correctly, then you're setting yourself up and your patients for failure.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the thing is that a lot of even experienced people get stuck in one area. And,
Yeah.
it was the same thing for the operating room. Some people only did, general surgery for months and months. And then one day they're like, okay, go do, urology. And they have no idea what they're doing. They don't know the instrumentation. They don't know the procedure. And it's the same thing with sterile processing. You can't just say, do general trays for 3 months. And then one day, oh, just go, pick up this vascular tray.
Yeah.
Person's going to be lost. So, keeping people stuck in areas, or, always in decontam, or always in sterilization. I mean, I've seen that a lot. I've seen people who just always on sterilizers and then can never bounce out to do anything else.
And that's an important point, because there are facilities that have certain people assigned to certain tasks all the time. Like, you're my ortho specialist, so you only do ortho trays. Well, what happens when that person calls out?
Yeah.
You only do vascular trays. Same thing. I mean, I have had people that were very good at certain trays. I would say excellent, but I would rotate them through. Other people had to learn them, and they would mentor them. But if you do something like that, you have to be really, really careful, because you could lock yourself into a corner. People should be rotated so they know everything.
Yeah. I mean, we worked together at a facility. I think I had somebody in there for 30, no, maybe was it? I'd say 20 years. 20 years in decontam.
And she was doing it wrong.
Yeah, and doing it wrong. Yeah. And, was never given the opportunity to grow, or to, be better at her job. And that's horrible.
Well, when I got there, though, we did a competency assessment based on the competencies that I use, and she failed. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, 5 times. And this was over a 2-month period of time. We re-educated her each time. And she obviously had some disabilities that, would not get her to the point that she could comply and remember the information. But I went to HR and I said, look, this is a liability for you. If everybody else has to pass the competencies, how can you justify keeping this person in the department who's failed 5 times? And these were minimum competencies that we had. So you have to understand that competencies is not just something that we do because Joint Commission requires it. It has to mean something.
Yeah.
Because if that gets pulled into court, you better be able to document. You better be able to stand behind it.
Yep. And I would tell you, I would definitely like to finish this story in the sense of, don't give up on your staff, because even though that person was in their decontam for 20 years and was very against learning anything, they did come out, and they did. Maybe they weren't putting, our neuro sets together or vascular, but they started to, put basic trays together and started getting the concept, but then, took the easy way out because they were close to retirement age. So after a little push, they retired. But even being in there for 20 years and being so upset about taking out, they tried.
Yeah.
That's all that you can ask,
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but if this person was in there for the 20 years, which they were, you can't tell me there weren't complaints about instruments that weren't cleaned properly.
Oh, yeah.
So why wasn't that being handled? This was not her fault. This was a management fault.
Yep.
And management was responsible to take care of that. And you're right, she eventually was given a package and she did retire. But you've got to handle this. You really do. The definition of competent, I'm going to read this to you, is an individual's capacity to perform his or her job functions, whether in fact they have the knowledge and skills, behavior and performance characteristics to function well in a given situation. In other words, the ability to do what is required. And that's why when you do the assessment, there should be no error. And you have several times when you do your competency assessment, you have the competencies that you do during orientation, because, you don't want to find out at the 90-day probation period that, oh, by the way, you're not going to work out here. No, they should be given feedback all along.
Mhm.
And then you get.
So the 90-day thing is really important. That is so important because if you by any chance hired the wrong person, that is
Oh,
your only gateway to get the person out after 90 days. Because once they
yeah,
pass that 90 days, anybody that's watching this that that works in a hospital knows it is so hard to get somebody out after 90 days, no
yeah,
matter how bad they're doing.
yeah. And again, we go back to good documentation. Sometimes, and I hate to say this, but the people who are performing the competencies don't want to get anybody in trouble,
Mhm.
don't want anybody to lose their job, and we don't either. But
Yeah.
the point is, this is all the documentation we have in sterile processing can be subpoenaed, so they're considered legal documents. So if you're falsifying that document, that's not good.
No.
So, if you're saying, Mary, interpret this sterilizer printout for me. And if Mary interprets it wrong, then you have to mark that as a fail. And then you're going to re-in-service her. And in 2 weeks, you're going to go back and you're going to do it again
Mhm.
and make sure that they're still doing it correctly. But if you say, oh, well, you got the pressure wrong, so next time, remember this, they check them off as correct. No, it has to be done without error. And if it's not, then it's considered a fail.
Yeah. And I think what's important, you just said, like, nobody wants anybody to lose their job. But if I give you training, I give you competency, I put the time in for you, and you are still producing bad things, and it is now becoming a problem where you're harming patients, that's the name of the game. It's the patient safety.
You're a manager. You're managing not only the department, but the people.
Hmm.
Again, some people always say, oh, that's really terrible. I wouldn't want to work for them. It's very difficult to be a manager because you cannot have biases. You cannot have preferences. You have to be objective. And you have to remember that you have a person who's counting on this income. And you also have a patient who's counting on you to do what's right for them.
Hmm.
And you have to make sure that everybody comes out a winner.
Yep.
That's the only thing you could do. You may have to go to HR to get some assistance. We've had people that, were colorblind and we
Mhm.
didn't know it. And then we found out we had to transfer them to another department that they could work with. The colorblindness didn't affect their overall performance. But you have to do what you have to do. I'll give you an example. One of the early dates of the certification exam here in New Jersey, I was an observer, unannounced observer. And I went in and I found a lady who was in her desk and she had a huge magnifying glass. And she was reading the questions with the magnifying glass. And I didn't say anything to her, but her manager was also in the room. And I said to him, I said, is that one of your employees? He said, yes. I said, why is she using a magnifying glass? He said, oh, she's legally blind. I said, well, what is she doing working in your department? He said, well, he said, she has very little income and we're trying to help her out. I said, yeah, but I said, legally blind, what can she do if she's legally blind? I mean, they were telling me that when she walked into the department, she actually had her hand on another person's shoulder as they walked her in. Yes,
Oh
that's how
my
bad it was.
God.
And I felt so bad for her. And I said, and what did you do as a manager to help her? He said, well, I don't know what I could do other than to allow her to work here. I said, oh, so now we're not only not helping her, but we're potentially harming a patient. So we went to HR and they actually were able to get her additional assistance because of her disability through Social Security. And she was so happy because now, she had the income she needed. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she needed the money.
Mhm.
And she was not at fault. I blamed the manager.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, that was scary. That was really scary.
Now, you brought up, the colorblind test, and this is something that I've come across throughout the years. What, like, have you ever been in a situation where somebody can't pass the colorblind, the book test? The book they give you, but you can throw at them 100 indicators and ask them to change, look at the color changes and tell me, and they can completely do that, but they fail the book test.
Well, I don't know what the test that they're using. If that is their standard and they fail it, then they fail it. We have today we have a lot of different things that are color. We have different BIs, we have different CIs, we have different autoclave tape. They're all different colors. And some of them are like pink and some of them are gold. And that's the danger, they have to be able to interpret these things. So if they fail what the standard is for your facility, then they have to determine what they're going to do.
Yeah, I guess my pet peeve on that was always give the indicators as give the work that they're doing as a colorblind test versus some random book that was published 50 years ago or 20 years ago. But I mean that's I do right you said. I mean if it's the standard of what the hospital's doing, it's what they do. But I think that people when they have tests like that should be based more on the things that they're doing versus
But the problem is you don't know all of them, and they keep coming out with different ones. That's the problem. And I hear where you're coming from, because you don't want to lose somebody on the basis of that, problem. But again, when it comes to employees, it has to be consistent and it has to be fair.
Yep. So, all right. So, Nancy, let's jump into this. I'm your I'm your manager, and you're my director, and I just hired us a new employee. What is our training going to be like?
You tell me. You're the manager. What do you plan for this person? You're the manager. You have to have a plan for training.
Correct. So, all right. So we're going to have a complete schedule to where they're, we know where they're going, where they're starting. We're going to have preceptors planned out. We're going to have a sheet with, a competency training sheet that's going to discuss over, certain amount of weeks in decon, certain amount of weeks in, I don't know how, I would say like some people want to do instruments first, and some people like to start training in decon first. I was always a decon first person, because if I was always say, if you don't know how to disassemble and clean it, then how do you know how to check it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I've always
there's no rule, but I agree with you. It all starts in decontam.
Yeah, and I've had that problem as a manager with supervisors who don't agree with me, and they want the instruments first. But so I would have that all set up, and again, knowing who's going to train who, have timelines set for each area, and have a competency/training schedule paperwork to fill that out. And, we would start the process. That's basically my steps.
And that is very good. It's just a couple of things that I would reinforce. Number one, to try and have the same person do the bulk of the training. Of course, that person has to have days off and what have you, unless you have a dedicated person. But it provides for consistency, and they develop a rapport with the employee. Number two, that orientation guide, which can be on a computer, which sometimes is better because they tend to get lost, they get wet, you don't want to put them down in decontam. That is a legal document, because I always ask for that in a lawsuit. I want to see the orientation guide, what kind of training they had. And there has to be a checkoff or a competency assessment at the completion of the training of that particular task. So say, for example, we're working on ultrasonic cleaners right now. And I would go over what it is, how it works, how to test it, how to put the water in, how to load the items, and what have you. And the employee's going to do this maybe 2, 3, 4 days, and I'll be observing, and I'll say, Jason did that perfectly. I'll say, okay, Jason, I'm going to do your competencies on the ultrasonic cleaner. And we do everything, we check it off, and now you can use the ultrasonic cleaner without someone looking over your shoulder. And that's what your competency assessment and orientation is so critical.
Yeah. So how, like, so again, this is another arguable thing usually I see in multiple places. How much time do you think each section should get in training?
There is no set time because it depends on the sophistication and the size of the facility. You
Mhm.
know, if you're in an eye surgery center, for example,
Yeah.
you may have total of 10 different types of trays. Okay. So you may see all of them within 1 week. You may see all of them within 1 month. You may see all of them, 80% of them within 1 month, and the others only occasionally. Now, in a situation like that, if you've never done the trade, then obviously we would do things where Mary would say, "Hey, I'm doing such and such a trade," and everybody say, "Oh, we want to see what you're doing." So that was one way to get everybody in on it when they were doing a trade that was rarely used. But it really depends on the sophistication. When I did my studies on training, I found that the average amount of time, no, 80% of the responding facilities said that they had 3 weeks of training, 1 week in decontam, 1 week in prep and packaging, 1 week in sterilization.
Oh.
Yes,
I,
there is no way.
I can tell you, I usually do each section, and this is rough. And I always tell the new person, I'm like, it's not going to be easy, but it's only for this one time. But I'll do like 4 to 6 weeks in decon. Depending if you can get it in 4 weeks, then you move on. But if you don't, we're gonna give you the extra time. And then it's the same thing again. I do. I always see, and again, this aggravates everybody when they work with me. I always do instruments last because there's, depending on your facility again, and I'm used to working more in hospitals where you have hundreds of trays.
Right, right.
If you need to take 8 weeks on instruments, which you most likely will have to if you want to hit them all, I'd
Yeah,
write that at the end. What I usually start to do though, at the 6 week part of instruments, I start throwing them back in 1 day or two a week to do sterilization or decon so they're not losing that skill,
right.
but still mostly concentrating on. And I, you know, I know with the hospital's rules, you have 90 days. So I try to have at least their training up to 90% on training by the 90 days. But
Mhm.
I really don't really clear them 100% until they're 6 months in.
And I agree with you. I've never done this, but I wonder if you can extend their probationary period. If for any reason you might want to do that, if you think somebody is really a good candidate, because the problem you have is if you put a limit, even if it's 6 weeks, and they're getting there, and they're doing a great job, but you're concerned about, well, then am I going to have enough time for instruments, what have you? You're hurting the patient. Why would you put that person and move them to the next step when they haven't completed the basic step? If they don't understand and can be proficient in decontam, it's not going to work.
Yep. And everybody, this aggravates me so much. Everybody learns different. So if you, as a trainer or a person developing the competencies in the training, no, you're not allowing them to do something different, but you've got to be able to wiggle it a little bit to meet some people's needs, long as it's having a safe outcome, you know?
Yeah. The problem is when you get somebody in who worked at another facility, and whether they're certified or not, and they come in and they're working in decontam and they're doing their own thing. Oh, I
Yes.
know how to do that. And they're not complying with your policies.
Yes.
And that is very difficult. You have got to tell them, this is our house. This is the way we do things. We follow these standards, and this is the expectation. You must follow our policies. That's really, really important.
And you're right, because I've done the interviewing process where you do, the peer interviews. And I've
Yeah.
had people say, like my peers come to, like the staff come to me and say, I know they have experience, but I know where they work and they do everything wrong. And, I don't know if they're going to want to do it our way. And, we'd rather you hire the person that doesn't know what they're doing so we can mold them. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, one of the hospitals that we worked at, we had a traveler
Uh-huh.
that was causing chaos in Decontam because he was telling them, "Oh, you don't have to do that. This is the way we did it at the last hospital, and it's a well-known hospital. Blah blah blah." No, this is the way we do it. It's all based on standards. We have a health department that inspects us to make sure we're following those standards. And the person was really ticked off.
Uh-huh.
Like there was something wrong with what I was doing. But that's where, again, you have to have consistency. We can't do, we used to joke all the time. If somebody was having surgery, they'd go, "Don't let Nancy do my tray. Make
Uh-huh.
sure it's by mirror." Because they knew that every time
Yes.
Nancy did the tray, something was wrong. Well, the patient doesn't have that choice.
Uh-huh.
The patient doesn't call down and say, "Hey, who's going to do my tray? Make sure it's not that person, Nancy."
Yep. Or,
And
yourself, you having surgery yourself and you're saying, I want this person to wash it. I want this person to put it together. You know, that's bad. I get it, but if you should be able to walk in there and go, I don't care who did it, just let me have my surgery.
well, I have to tell you, I've had 9 major surgeries,
Uh-huh.
and I always make sure they don't put me to sleep. And so I want to see the chemical indicators, and I also tell them, don't you dare perform immediate use. I don't care what your problem is, no immediate use on me. But again, we joke around. They know me, I know them, but patients don't have that knowledge. They are assuming they're coming to you, and you are going to do everything correctly to make them better. And
Yep.
unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And it's hitting the news now.
Mhm. Yes. You brought up travelers for a real good question, and we'll give another scenario where I'm your manager, and I said to you, well, we got the traveler in, but I didn't do a competency because they're only here for 13 weeks,
Ooh,
right?
well, my recommendation, and I've always used this since I got burned one time. We had a traveler who came in who knew everything and didn't know anything. And when I say anything, couldn't even wrap a basin. Um, I recommend that when you have a traveler come in, or if you hire someone with experience, that you do a competency assessment, not the one that you would use for orientation, but your annual competency to see where they are.
Uh-huh.
Because again, once you hire them, it becomes not only a hassle, but a financial burden for the facility. Plus, now you have to start all over again, looking for somebody. You're down another person now because that person. So do your competency assessment the day they come in.
Yep.
And, that one day when she couldn't wrap the basin, I called the company and said, "I'm not paying to show this person how to wrap a basin. If they
Uh-huh.
can't wrap a basin, they're not going to be able to do anything else. So goodbye, send me somebody else."
I actually too give my travelers a little bit of an orientation where
Mm,
the first week I have somebody work with them
yeah,
decon, and I got blasted for that many times because it's looked as a waste of money because they're supposed to come in and just be able to work, but no, they don't know the facility, they don't know our trays, they don't know our policies. They A traveler should have at least a week of orientation.
yeah. And even your equipment,
Yeah.
there's different washers, different sonics, different cart washers. I go into departments all the time, and so have you.
Uh-huh.
If I went in and they had a piece of equipment that I never saw before, I'm gonna say, "Oh, what can you tell me about this? I'm
Uh-huh.
not familiar with it." There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, even as a new manager, I've walked into facilities and said to my staff, "Don't know that piece of equipment. You're gonna have to show me.
Yeah,
Never seen it. You never
yeah,
heard of it."
yeah.
Because
I mean, we have new equipment coming out every single day. You can't keep up with it, just like we can't keep up with the instruments.
yeah,
So, but that's really important. Don't assume when you hire somebody, whether it be a traveler or whether you have, even though the companies say they're certified and they've worked at these hospitals, they were very happy. That's fine. I'm just going to do a quick competency assessment so that we have documentation that they know what they're doing.
yeah. So annual competencies, and I know this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about because one, I've worked with yours. I've done your annual competencies for myself, but then I've also used them and gave them to you know, to people that we worked with. You write a great competency, so definitely if we can, you can explain to us, you know, some of the things that, you know, how you develop competencies and what you use to develop it, and you know, what's, most important to be on there.
Well, again, with your orientation competencies, that's the assessment of each task that's on there. Okay. When it comes to annual competencies, it can't be quick and dirty. You want to identify the knowledge and the skills that are necessary for competent performance. What are the critical things that happen in your department that could really make a difference if they were done wrong? So I'm at one facility, and you remember this one, and I was looking at their sterilization records, and they handed me a garbage bag. And I said, "What's this?" "Well, there are sterilizer printouts." "That's how you save them?" "Yeah." I said, "And if I was a Joint Commission surveyor, you would expect me to go through all of them?" "Well, yeah, if they wanted to, that would be the..." I said, "No, that's not the way it works." So I was asked to go through all of them, get them all in order by date, by sterilizer. It took me a whole week. When we were done, we were missing 1 week of sterilizer printouts for all of the sterilizers, 1 whole week. And so I went to them. I said, "You're missing these printouts." I said, "The legal documents, we got to have it." "Well, they should be there." I said, "But they're not there. We have to find out where they are." So we're looking and we're looking and we're looking. And I mean, we're tearing the place apart. I went to the manager and I said, "Look, something's wrong here. What went on these dates? I mean, was there, something that, the flood that they got wet? What the heck's going on?" "Oh, no, the engineering guy was on vacation." I said, "And?" "Well, he's the only one who could put the paper in because he's afraid we're going to mess it up." "Are you kidding me?" So you sterilized for 3 weeks. You have no printouts to prove it. And it's all because your staff didn't know, or engineering didn't trust that they could do it. This is the kind of stuff that really drives people crazy. So, that all of these things that could get you into trouble, I make sure I put on that competency assessment. So in decontam, depending on the equipment we have, I'll do observations on the ultrasonic cleaner. And there's 2 ways of doing this. You do an assessment in terms of knowledge. And for testing their knowledge, you're going to ask a question. For example, "Jason, explain to me what ultrasonic cleaning means and how to test the unit to make sure it's working correctly." Okay. So my expectation is you're going to tell me that, "Well, I make sure I clean out the chamber. I put the water quality that they recommend. I run a degas cycle," and I have to explain what the degas cycle is to me. And then we do 2 tests. We do a cavitation test and we do a cleaning test, and they can be done at the same time. Okay, so they were able to answer all of those questions. That's a knowledge question. Now, the other questions you ask are they're skills questions. For knowledge, I'm getting myself confused. That was knowledge. For skill, I'm going to say, "Jason, demonstrate to me removal of your PPE."
Uh-huh.
Now that's a skill. You're going to have to show me how you start with your shoe covers and how you take it off according to the CDC guidelines. So there's certain words you use when you're testing knowledge. For example, knows, understands, explains, demonstrates. Okay. All of that is where you have to answer a question. For skills, interprets a sterilizer printout, loads a sterilizer correctly. There's verbs, and that's going to show me if you know how to do that. So there's 2 different observations, knowledge and skills, and they could be mixed. You could have more in one area than another. Then you want to look at the things that are critical. So in decontam, depending on the type of equipment you have and the scope of services, you could have maybe 10 things that you're going to look at. In prep and packaging, I might have another 10 things we're going to look at. For example, demonstrate how you would apply a wrapper to this item. Demonstrate how you would prepare a set in a rigid container. So you're looking to see, which nobody does, inspecting the gasket and all the pieces on there. Nobody does that. They should, but they don't. It's not correct. If they're putting the indicators in the correct location. So you might not have rigid containers. So if you don't, you have to worry about it. Then you go into sterilization. If you only have steam, if you have steam and low temperature, if you have high level disinfection, what are the things there? Are they cleaning it correctly? Are they checking the concentration of the solution? Do they have a thermometer? I was at a facility. They never, ever tested the temperature of the Cydex OPA. Never. Didn't even have a thermometer in there. They said, well, room temperature. How do you know it's room temperature? Well, I put my finger in it. Oh, don't tell that to the lawyers. So, but this is where you find the errors, okay? And this is where you, I mean, it's bad that you're finding it now because obviously there was no record. You know, I had a record that really helps because you can monitor almost every day. I had a documentation form for high-level disinfection where they had to document the temperature. And you say, well, that's a good thing. No, I went into one of my facilities and instead of the temperature was 10 degrees lower than what it should be. And I said, you have the wrong temperature. Yeah, but it says we just have to document the temperature. You have to document the temperature because if you don't have the correct temperature, that means the item was not high level disinfected. Didn't understand that. So I had a lot of documentation forms that we could monitor on a routine basis where, you know, the supervisors or the leads would go through and every day they would go to each area and see how people were doing and check the documentation paperwork. So, so you could have, I've had some facilities where we've had as many as 45 assessments in the annual competencies. But again, it could go anywhere from 20 to 50, depending on how much equipment and different instrumentation you have. Now, we didn't do the only instrumentation that we really concentrated on. We had them show us how to test a ratchet if it held, show us how to test it if a scissor was sharp, showed us how they tested if a rongeur would work. But the laparoscopic instruments and testing with the insulation tester, that is 100% of the time in there, 100% of the time.
Yeah, and then there should be a lot of people don't document the testing.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, don't bother doing it then. I had 3 lawsuits I consulted on. One of them said they did it, but it was documented on the count sheet. Well, at the end of the case, what happens to the count sheet? It goes out. So, and you know, in a court of law, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. In another facility, they said, well, that's our policy. We know we always follow it. The lawyer said, prove it.
Yeah.
You can't. So
there's some operating rooms now that have newer technology where they test it on the field too.
Oh yeah.
And again, if your operating room is doing that, doesn't mean that you stop doing that in sterile processing.
Because the testers that we have also can test for conductivity of the wires and the electrical components. Most people today, though, there are 2 other methods, as you said, the sterile insulation tester in the operating room. But we talked about this before. Time is money in the operating room, and if they have to test all those instruments, that's delaying the case. It's much better that if we tested an SPD, because now they know the instruments they're getting have already been tested. And then there's the third type that you buy the instruments from the company and they continually monitor the insulation. And if that instrument is not working correctly, the machine shuts that instrument down. But insulation testing is a huge liability, huge. And it's got to, and when we say documented, you don't just put lap chole tray, all instruments tested. No, lap chole tray number 4, because all of your sets should be numbered to document quality issues And in case of a recall, and you sterilize it. If it says lab choline tray, which one was it? So you put lab choline tray number 1, to recall it. But under lab choline tray number 1, then you list every single instrument on the tray.
Yeah.
Because you have to be able to prove they were all tested. And not only that, on your form, if it failed, what did you do?
Yeah.
If you just put fail, you know how that's presented to the jury? Well, they obviously put it back into use. They didn't want to pay to have it fixed.
Yes.
Now, nothing could be further from the truth, but that's how it's presented. So, failed test, send out for repair.
Be honest with you, too, a lot of times it gets put back in there because they don't have a replacement. So you have to make sure.
Nobody should be doing that.
Yeah, you have to have the proper inventory. If you're a heavy volume laparoscopic place, then you need to have that extra volume, because the way that the operating room works, and it can get rough in surgery. You could be, every time you process a tray, you could be putting something out for repair. So if you have 10 trays, you need to have like good amount of replacements.
You're right. As the manager, you are, and we've said this on all these podcasts, you are producing sterile medical devices. That end user, be it the OR, labor and delivery, what have you, has the right to assume that everything you sent to them was safe to use, or you wouldn't have released it from your department. And that's the liability you as the manager would face in a court of law. They don't want to know, well, they didn't have enough instruments. Oh, now they're going to tell the jury that's why they're too cheap to buy more. They care more about the budget than they do the patient. You take that instrument, you send it out, you tell the OR this instrument had to go out for repair. You will set up to do the trays, tell you that we don't have this instrument, that it's missing. And most facilities have backups. They're wrapped separately. So they can go into storage and get it out. But we should never, ever, ever send anything to the OR, because we are liable. Once we release it, that is like the fruit of the loom, Inspector 12, and seal of approval. And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
No, and it's funny you just brought up the business thing. So as of today, I'm in school for business degree, and I'm starting now to see why. Because I worked for 30 years without a business degree, and I did like almost 20 years of it as management, and I would constantly battle the financial people, because I was a patient advocate. I was a operating room sterile processing person, so patient advocate was my number one. I am now starting to see why the business people think the way they do, with which is, again, it doesn't necessarily match to the patient ethics, because it's all about numbers and money. But now I'm starting to understand, like, oh my God, like that's, in the business world, they really do. It's money, 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 numbers, numbers, numbers. And I am a firm believer in peri-op services. Numbers, and the numbers in finance don't always, match procedures. And because, again, a lap chole for one person is not the same for the next. There could be added supplies, added instruments you could open. And I always felt numbers, because numbers and finance are always number one now in healthcare. But when it comes to surgical procedures and departments that sterile processing, pre-op, recovery, OR, numbers should go below, like patients first, numbers second. I really do.
And this is a very important point. When we hire people and they work outside of healthcare, they have to understand that it's a different ballgame. At 4:45, they don't even wait till 5 o'clock. Okay, shut the computer off, close that down, put my phone on voicemail, and I go home.
Yes.
That's not the way it is in a hospital or healthcare setting.
Yep.
Our number one priority is the patient. It should be. And yes, there are times when, it may be inconvenient. You have to stay later. You have an emergency. I always try to ask for volunteers first, because I knew some of my people, because another thing we need to talk about in one of these is the pathetic salaries that a lot of these people are making in sterile processing, but that's for another show.
Yeah.
They have a second job and they have to go to it. And, that's a whole nother issue. But I would always ask for volunteers first. There are always a lot of people that, they wanted to make the overtime, and I usually didn't have an issue with that. But there's a whole different set of priorities. And it's very difficult for people who haven't worked in healthcare before to really get on board with that. And that's another thing that I explained to them, when I'm interviewing them. I said, this is not a 9 to 5 job. In some facilities, you're required to rotate, you may be hired for the day shift, but the evening shift is short. You might have to rotate to that shift. And that's the way it is in healthcare. We had this, ice storm here this winter where for 4 days, nobody could get out because we had snow, and then we had 2 inches of ice an inch of ice on top of it. We were iced in, and the people at the hospitals couldn't get in and couldn't get out. So people who were there had to stay there. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So it's really important that people understand the importance of the job, and why we usually have so many discussions as managers with the finance people, because they have the blinders on. Bottom line, I have to have this bottom line. I don't care what happened. And, we're there saying, yeah, we're going to hold the line. But if we have to go over that line for the safety of a patient, then that's what we have to do. Yeah. And that's why in your budget, when you're over, you have a justification clause. And you have to put in there, well, this is the 3rd time the sterilizer broke down. Maybe you want to think about getting me that new one that you've been telling me I was going to get for the past 5 years. Yes. But they don't have the same mindset that we do. Yeah. And that's where the challenge is. I always found that my vice president, who really understood both of them, was really a good resource for me, because he said, yelling at you is like yelling at the angels. He said, you want to do what's right, and I can't get mad at you. And I said, I don't care if you get mad at me. Just tell me that I can have what I need. But we had an excellent, relationship, and I would give him the documentation, and he would go to the board for me, to do what we did. But that's your job. Your job is to protect the patient, and you do not cut corners. Yep. But any instance, because remember, your name and your job is on the line in a court of law. And anybody who thinks it can't happen, they're deluding themselves.
Now, for this, to wrap up this competency, you have 17 different pieces of equipment. You got 17 competencies on each. You don't skip a machine. You do one for every.
At least one. Like for a cart washer, there's only a certain way you can load the carts, and there's only a couple buttons. The ultrasonic and the washers are the critical ones, because if they don't do a good job of cleaning, then it's going to affect everything else. And I have more than those two. I go for the manual cleaning. Are they cleaning below the water level? How are they cleaning the lumens? We're going to do a couple on decontam, because I have a lot of problems with what's happening with lumens. So all of this is you have to base it on, again, what is the risk? Pick the high risk things that are being done and make sure you test them annually.
Also products?
Some of them. Again, products could change. I'll ask a question, like, I'll never forget, one of the times I was doing it in my old department, we had some new employees, and I said, okay, Joe, I'm doing your competencies. What detergent do you use for manual cleaning in the sink? And he looked over, he goes, the pink one. What is the pink one? It's a cleaner. What type of a cleaner? I don't know. All he could tell me was the pink one. So, that was a fail. I had to go through and say, no, if it's it's an enzymatic cleaner, this is what it does, and what have you. So in a case like that, it's important. I would always ask about how much detergent. Now, people do have the proportioners, but I'd ask them, how do you know it's working correctly?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that it's working correctly? You're getting the correct dosage, which is critical.
Mhm.
For the washers, I cut out all of the cycles that they should not use because I found the staff was being pressured to turn trays around, and they were putting orthopedic trays through a basin cycle.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and we found out when we saw the results of the cleaning effectiveness testing. So we locked out all of those cycles. There's things you could do that. You could lock out cycles on your sterilizer also, and
Mhm.
just leave one open. You know, if you have something special come in. But yeah, you do have to have something on the equipment as well.
Equipment, supplies. If you're doing high level disinfection, you have to have that whole process. If you're doing something off the unit and like helping testing a TE probe or something in another area of other than your own department. If your staff's involved in it, you have to make sure there's competencies on that. If you're picking case carts, there should be basic a small competency.
Right.
Almost every aspect of the job should have some form of competencies. Some can be a 10-second thing. Some
Mhm.
need to be more, maybe a 5-minute, 10-minute process, depending on this, the equipment and the complexity of it.
Yeah, and when we used to go out and pick up patient care equipment, I would shadow them. I'd send them out and I'd tell them I was going to follow them, and either me or a supervisor would follow them. We'd look to see did they wear the impervious lab coat? Did they have their gloves on? Did they put the equipment, in the bins on the cart, or if they had to be, manually cleaned, did they cover them with a biohazard cover? So anything that you're doing that could present an issue for safety, either for the employee or the facility or the patient, should be included.
Absolutely. And I think, the final part about competencies is, and I love this. This is my favorite part when, what did you use to develop it? The person gives me the name of the organization they're certified by as where they got the information from.
Well, for the competency assessment?
Well, yeah, for competence, sometimes competencies or policies too. Sometimes where you got certified is not the national standards because a lot of people get confused. The national standards is AMI, and a lot
Oh,
a lot of
oh,
people tell you when you say what standards do you follow, they tell you whatever certification company
yeah.
they'll
And,
tell
and
you the standard.
that's because their textbooks usually, cite all of them. But you're absolutely correct. Your
Yeah,
policy should reflect the national standards, be it AMI, and then your guidelines. And AMI is national standards. Then you have your regulations from CDC and FDA and OSHA. Would also be referenced, but I hear that a lot too.
yeah.
This organization tells me to do that, and I said, well, they may, and it is correct, but it actually comes from, Amy.
So when you're building your competency, make sure you're using AMI standards. Again,
Correct.
a lot of peri-op people like to skip AMI and use ARN for their competencies. But again, if it's sterile processing related, especially if it's IUSS, you have to use AMI.
Yes.
Uh, you can, if you want to put both in there, as long as they match, that's fine. But if they're contradicting each other, you have to go with the national standard.
Yeah.
AMI.
Yeah. It's easiest to just do the national standard with Amy
Mhm.
because that's consistent verbiage throughout all of them. And, again, not to say take anything away from AORM, but there are some differences that can cause some confusion. Like we talked about in one of the other programs about the head cover.
Yep.
They leave it on. We're supposed to take it off. So that's important too.
And number one when building a competency, IFUs. Make
Yes.
sure you
Yeah.
incorporate the
Yeah.
product's IFUs if you're going to do a competency on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure they know how to look up a IFU and pick one that, is unusual. Don't pick out like, ABC instrument. Maybe do an ortho set. Show me where you get the information for ABC, next generation knee or something like that, and see if they can find it either in your book if you have it manually or on the computer, because that's what the surveyors expect from them, that they can find the correct IFU.
Mhm. All right, Nance. I think, well, we're definitely like usual over time.
I can't believe it. Hour passed already.
Oh, we just, we have so much fun and love talking. All right. Well, thank you. I want to thank the listeners. Please like and subscribe and leave comments. We love it.
Yes, thank you. And make sure to tell your friends about these because we're really enjoying them, and we hope that you're enjoying them too.
To receive your free CEU approved by the CBS SPD and HSPA, go to www.spdceus.com. Watch the entire podcast on the Sterile Processing University page, and then after that, you will receive a free 1-hour CEU. Thank you.
Sooner or later, and there is not a boy I know who wouldn't want to date her. She is the epitome of everything that's groovy. How I'd like